What's up, guys? This is the review of the 2015 BMW 328i. And before I start talking about this car, I just want to give a shout out to my buddy Federico, who let me borrow this car and do a review on it. Thanks, Federico. So like I said, this is the 2015 BMW 328i. This is the 6th generation of the BMW 3 Series, dubbed the F30 generation. It was produced from 2011 until 2019. In 2011, it was released as the 2012 model year. And initially, it came available with the three different trim level models: the 320i, the 328i, which is the one that you see here, and then the top of the line 335i. In 2016, BMW updated this car, the LCI, the life cycle impulse as they call it, and the 328i became the 330 and received a new engine, and the 335i became the 340i. And also initially, so during the 2011 until 2015, this particular car, the 328i, came equipped with a 4-cylinder turbo engine, which was a big departure from the previous generation 328i, which came with BMW's naturally aspirated inline 6 engine. So this one came with a turbo 4, the N20, producing 240 horsepower and 260 pound-foot of torque. In 2016, when the LCI models came out, the N20 was replaced by the B48 4-cylinder turbo engine, and the N55 that was in the 335 was replaced with the B58 inline 6 turbo engine. So there are a lot of different several different options that came available in this car, but the big sort of difference is that all of those were either a turbo 4 or a turbo 6-cylinder engine. All right, let's talk about the looks of this car. So in many ways, this particular car has, the same characteristics of many BMW 3 Series. It's got the long hood, it's got the short overhangs, it's got a long wheelbase, it's got a short trunk lid, it's got the Hofmeister kink that's right over here. But the big difference, big styling difference between this car and the 3 Series that preceded it, i.e. the E90 generation, were these headlights, right? So with the F30, the big design difference was the fact that the headlights actually touched the BMW kidney grille, right? So in the previous generations, the headlights would kind of stop right here, and then you'd have the body panel before you got to the BMW kidney grille. With the F30, that actually the headlights join touch the kidney grille, and that was actually an homage to the E30 BMW 3 Series from the 80s. That's what the designer was saying was his motivation to kind of come up with this design where the headlights and the grille were actually touching each other, because if you look at that second generation 3 Series, the E30, it sort of worked that way as well. It's also worth noting that this particular car came available with different trim lines. So you could initially you could get a sport trim line, a luxury trim line, and then later on they also added the M Sport trim line. So kind of probably the M Sport is probably the best looking one. That's what the M4 and the M3 look like. But so this one doesn't have the M Sport, but it's still a good looking car. It's the proportions are just right, and it is a much bigger car than the previous generation BMW 3 Series, the E90. And in many ways, kind of that was sort of the whole purpose behind this car was to make it a little bit bigger. And if you actually, whenever I'm driving around and I see this car on the street, and if it's far away, sometimes I'm not 100% sure whether it's a 3 Series or a 5 Series. So it's noticeably bigger than the previous generation BMW 3 Series. But all in all, great looking car. And let's take a look at the inside. The interior of the car is concerned is they wanted to make more room for the rear passengers. So there's more legroom for the rear passengers, and there's also more headroom. And I think the car is also a little bit wider than the E90 3 Series. So here's what the car looks like from the back. And as we go inside, you know, you got quite a bit of storage right here. And before I step in, I'll just kind of let you take a look what this car looks like on the inside. All right, let's go inside. So here we are, inside of the BMW 328i, and you know, in here it's pretty nice. You've got really nice materials. You've got the wood trim here. You've got the wood trim all along the column right here. This one comes equipped with the iDrive, so the dash it's sort of integrated into the dash, the screen. This is a sport steering wheel, and it's pretty nice. Got the higher 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock notches. It's got you know, various buttons here that allow you to control the car, the radio, etc. On the inside, again, you've got the big dials that tell you what you need to know. You got the speedometer on the left, rev counter on the right, and then you have the temperature gauge display right there, and then also the fuel gauge. But in many ways, you know, the interior of this car feels like, you know, it's typical 3 Series. The leather's nice. The wood trim is nice. This car comes equipped with an automatic transmission, 8-speed automatic transmission. So the stick here, or the gear lever, looks quite different. You also have different modes that you can be driving with: Eco, Pro, Comfort, and Sport. You can also turn the traction control off. Really nice thing about this BMW 3 Series is the cup holders are much better than they are in the E90 generation that pull out from here. So you got nice sturdy cup holders. But all in all, the look and feel of this car on the inside is really nice. It feels like a premium vehicle. And one thing that I really like about it is the way this part comes up. It kind of shifts or turns this entire display, the radio, the air conditioning controls towards the driver. So it's more similar. It's similar to kind of what the E36 BMW 3 Series interior looked like. You kind of feel like you're in the cockpit of a you know, of a sports car. That way, just the way it's angled towards the driver. You didn't really have that in the E90 generation. This kind of entire area was flat and neutral. So I was glad to see a BMW going back to that. And kind of this is sort of, you know, this design feature right here is what kind of gives you at least the optics of this entire dash kind of wrapping around the driver, and you know, making you feel like you're in a cockpit of a fighter jet. So, okay, got the push button start. That's what the car sounds like when you turn it on. And yeah, all in all, great place to be in. Very nice feel to it. Very you know, typical high luxury BMW 3 Series. And yeah, I like the interior. So without further ado, let me take this car out for a little spin and give you my impression of its driving characteristics. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, this is going to be the driving review of the 2015 BMW 328i. And in today's review, I'm going to cover two things. First, I'm going to begin talking about why this particular generation of the BMW 3 Series received so much criticism when it was first released from the car enthusiast crowd, and also address whether that criticism was warranted. And then I'm going to conclude the driving review by talking about the car's actual driving characteristics. So let's start with part one, why this car received criticism from the likes of Car and Driver magazine and other car enthusiasts. And I think there's several, right? So when this particular car came out, the BMW 328i, this was the first generation, at least in a long time, that did not become available in North America with a BMW's naturally aspirated inline-six engine, right? So in the previous generation BMW 3 Series, the E90 generation, your entry-level BMW 328i came with the F30 engine in 2007 and on, and that was a naturally aspirated inline-six engine, and that engine has been a staple of BMW 3 Series. Those types of engines make the car super fun to drive. They're engaging, they need to be revved out to produce the maximum amount of power. They make an awesome noise when you're pushing the car. They're super responsive. So there was a large number of BMW enthusiasts who love the naturally aspirated BMW inline-six engines. So when this car was released in 2012, the option was no longer available. Instead, you could only get a turbo 4, right? And turbo engines, there's a lot to like about turbo engines. They're typically more efficient than naturally aspirated engines. They're also typically result in a faster car because they produce more torque than a naturally aspirated inline-six engine does, which is exactly the case with this particular car. This particular car produces, as I said, 240 horsepower, 260 pound-foot of torque, and as a result, it propels this car from 0 to 60 in about 5.5 seconds, 5.6, 5.7. So it's about a half a second faster to 60 than the previous generation BMW 328i. But one of the problems with, or I guess one of the critiques of turbo engines is that they are just not as engaging to drive as naturally aspirated engine. It's because they typically have a little bit more. They will have some turbo lag there, so they're not going to be as responsive as a naturally aspirated inline-six engine. And then they also produce most of their power lower in the RPM range, so there's no need to rev the engine out to get the maximum power output. So when this car first came out, one of the reasons that the BMW enthusiasts were disappointed was because in this generation you were not able to get the BMW naturally aspirated inline-six engine. So that's number one. The second issue that was heavily criticized, especially with the early models of the F30 generation, was the steering feel of the car, right? So in the F30 generation, the cars came equipped with electrically assisted steering racks, as opposed to hydraulically assisted steering racks, which you could find in the BMW E90 series. And consequently, because the steering went from being hydraulic to electric, the steering feel in the car is not as good as it is in a car, in a BMW that comes equipped with a hydraulically assisted steering rack. So that was a huge criticism. And if you back in 2012, 2013, if you were to read any sort of a magazine, Car and Driver, Road and Track, Motor Trend, etc., pretty much every single one of those publications would complain about the steering feel of the car, and it basically kind of took the approach that the car ended up being just was nowhere near as good, simply because the steering feel wasn't as good as it was in the previous generation 3 Series. Another complaint with this car by the enthusiasts was that this car became much more of a multi-purpose vehicle than the previous generation BMW 3 Series. It became a little bit softer, it became a little bit more comfortable, it became a little bit bigger, and although that's probably something what people want, like what your mainstream consumer wants, if you're dealing with car enthusiasts, they're not necessarily going to be huge fans of the car becoming softer. And if you drive this car back to back after the E90 generation 3 Series, you definitely can feel the you can definitely tell what people are talking about, right? The E90 feels a little bit more analog. It feels like it has more of a singular purpose in comparison to this car. This car, the F30, doesn't, you know, when you're driving it, it's not necessarily as focused towards, you know, driver enjoyment as the previous generation 3 Series are, right? And that's not really a criticism against this car. This car is just, it's been designed to be able to do more things, and one of those things is, you know, making it be a little bit more easier, or a little bit easier to live with on a day-to-day basis if this is going to be your daily driver. So that was also one of the criticisms of this car. And then finally, you know, this particular car, like many others, came equipped with different types of you know, driving modes. We could go Eco, Pro, Sports, you know, Comfort, etc. And as a result, you know, that again kind of took away a little bit from, you know, the core purpose of this car. With the core purpose of this car, of course, being, you know, centered around driver enjoyment and things of that nature. So those were, you know, that kind of sums up all the criticisms that this car received. And really the question ends up being is, you know, were those, you know, is that criticism fair? You know, and I think as, you know, these, you know, now that we've kind of had, you know, an entire generation of this car to live with, I think in many ways some of those criticisms may have been a little bit too harsh. Although it's true, right, that you know, the steering feel in this car is not as good as it is in the E90 BMW 3 Series. And although it's true that you got a Turbo 4 engine, in many ways, you know, this is still a great car. And in many ways, it's a better all-around driver than the E90 series. And what I mean by that is that this is going to be your, you know, daily driver. It can be, you know, a little bit easier to live with on a day-to-day basis. Again, it's bigger than the E90, so if you need to use the rear seats, this car is going to be a little bit more comfortable for the occupants of those seats. The car is a little bit softer, which again is not necessarily a bad thing if, you know, What's going on, guys? So unfortunately, during the driving review of the car, I had experienced some technical difficulties with my camera, and I was not able to capture the remainder of the driving review on video. Therefore, I'm going to use some other footage that I had recorded when reviewing this car, and I'm going to complete the review of the driving review of the car through a voiceover. So, sort of to close the loop on, you know, the first part of the review, which was discussing whether the criticism that this car had received from the car enthusiast community when it was first released was justified, is that, you know, I think in some ways the criticism was a little bit too much. I mean, the F30 generation 3 Series is still very much a BMW 3 Series. It looks great. It's great on the inside. It handles, you know, really well. It's got just a tight feel whenever you're operating the car, and it just feels, you know, you feel very comfortable driving that particular car. And although it's true that this particular car is not, you know, has a much more of a multi-purpose feel than the previous generation 3 Series, which have, you know, which just have the feel of being more driver-oriented, that still doesn't take away from the fact that, you know, this is still a great car. And as I was saying before the video cut out, in many ways, you know, this particular car, being a little bit softer, being a little bit bigger, being a little bit more comfortable, in some ways make it a better daily driver than the previous generation BMW 3 Series because of all of those factors. And I'll also conclude that part of the review by saying that, You know, even though the F30 generation lost the naturally aspirated inline-six engine, even though the F30 generation got the electrically assisted steering as opposed to a hydraulically assisted steering rack, that wasn't just, you know, BMW doing it. I mean, that was just a direction that pretty much all car manufacturers were taking their cars into, you know, during that time, during the 2010s, 2010s to 2020. There was, you know, pretty much any competitor of the BMW 3 Series, your Mercedes C-Class, your Audi A4s, etc. They all came equipped with, you know, turbo engines, either a turbo 6 or a turbo 4. Many of them didn't even offer manual transmission options, which is, you know, different than, you know, from BMW, where you could buy these cars with a manual transmission. So in many ways, I think the F30 represents not, it just sort of represents the era in which this car was conceived. So, you know, great car. Now, for the second part of the review, let me talk about the driving characteristics of this particular car. And you know, kind of to begin with, I will note that I've driven many different F30 generation of BMW 3 Series. I've driven the 320i, the 328i's, I've driven 330i's, 335i's, 340i's, right? And I've driven ones that come equipped with different packages. So I have, you know, a pretty good base of experience with this particular model, the 3 Series. And you know, in contrast to the previous generation BMW 3 Series, the F30 allowed the consumer to spec the car out much more than in the previous generation 3 Series. You know, you could get these cars with different packages. You know, this particular car that I'm driving doesn't come equipped with a sport package. It doesn't come equipped with a M Sport package. I mean, this is just, it doesn't have, you know, some of those features that one would want to include if they wanted to gear this car, spec this car to be, you know, as close to a, you know, enthusiast car, you know, driver-centered car as they wanted to. But having said that, this particular car, even though it's not an M Sport, still handles really well. It handles tight. I mean, when I was taking this car on the back roads that you see here, the car, you know, I felt, you know, one with the car. The car responded beautifully and perfectly. And again, you know, this particular car is not the M Sport package car. So if you were to spec this car, you know, with the M Sport package, and if you were to equip it with a manual transmission, then, you know, that type of an F30 3 Series would be more like the previous generation BMW 3 Series than, you know, specing one without, you know, the M Sport package, or you know, one that doesn't have, you know, paddle shifters, you know, if you're going to buy an automatic. So that's important to know, right? You know, the F30, you know, could feel quite differently from car to car depending on the features that it has. So that's one thing. One thing that I love about the F30 that I think is far superior to the E90 is the seating position of the car. And it's noticeable. This car has the perfect seating position, and you can easily find one that's going to fit your, you know, fit your height and weight. But it's one of those things where you can really position yourself nicely in the car, comfortably in a car, and it makes a big difference when you're driving the car. So the seating position of this car is excellent. In terms of the steering feel, again, you know, BMW was working hard to improve the steering feel in these cars. And although the early models, the 2012 to 2013s, had a very vague steering feel, with this particular 2015 model that I'm driving in this video, the steering feel improved quite a bit, and it's not as vague and as non-communicative as it was in the, you know, previous generation, or I'm sorry, in the earlier versions of this F30. This car also comes with an 8-speed Steptronic automatic transmission, and you know, it drives really well. I mean, it clicks through the gears really well. I will note that, you know, one of the things that I noticed whenever I was driving different types of F30s in comparison to the E90 Generation 3 Series is that, if you're going to buy this car with an automatic transmission, and especially if you're going to get one with paddle shifter so that you can be driving it in a manual mode, the fact that the car has 8 gears actually makes it a little bit more difficult to use in manual mode than the previous generation BMW 3 Series automatic transmissions that had only six gears. Because you're not controlling the gears with with the clutch and a stick. When you have to click through 8 gears versus 6 gears, you kind of tend to forget what gear you're in, and it makes it a little bit harder to find the perfect gear than if you're dealing with just 6 gears instead of 8. So that's another thing that I'll note. Also important to note is that whenever you were driving the 328i in the E90 Generation 3 series and then a 335i in the E90 Generation series, those cars felt very differently from one another. And that's because one of them, i.e. the 335i, had a turbocharged platform, whereas the 328i had a naturally aspirated platform. And so the way that you would drive those cars and the way those cars felt in the back roads was pretty different, right? I mean, it was a noticeable difference. With the F30 generation, the Turbo 4 and the Turbo 6, in many ways feel the same. And when you're driving a car on back roads like this, the difference between the 328i and the 335i is actually quite a bit smaller than in the previous generation 3 series. You've got plenty of torque in the 328i. You've got 260 pound-foot of torque. The horsepower, is pretty good at 240. So it doesn't feel that different from a 335i when you're driving on back roads like this. And just as was the case with the E90 series, the 328i actually feels a little bit better balanced than the 335i on these back roads. That 4-cylinder engine weighs less, and therefore the car is not as nose heavy as a 335i would be. And again, this being a turbocharged engine, another thing that you can do with these cars is you can tune them, right? And it's a lot easier to extract more power when you tune a turbocharged engine as opposed to a naturally aspirated engine. And there have been people that have been able to get 300 horsepower out of this N20 4-cylinder turbo engine, and that puts you into stock 335i territory. So just something to keep in mind that in many ways you could probably get a very similar driving experience in the 328i that you could get from a stock 335i. So the transmission's good, works really well. It's effortless, and if that's what you like, and if you're into automatic transmissions, then I think you're gonna love this particular ZF automatic transmission. So, in summary, guys, this particular car is still very much a BMW 3 Series. It's a BMW 3 Series that has evolved with the times, and I think it will be a great purchase. I think it'll be a great daily driver for anybody looking to get into a BMW, and the fact that you can get these with a manual transmission makes it that much better. So that concludes the driving review of the 2015 BMW 328i. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment below, subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks, guys.